All right. Well, if you all don't. Oh, well, let's see. If Mr. Moss is still on, we have a quorum. Is he still here?
Yeah, I'm still on.
Okay.
Just on phone. That's it.
All right. So we have a quorum of 4 then. Let's go ahead and get started. Maybe the others will be able to access in a couple of minutes. We'll call the Monday, May 18th, 2020, City of Homestead Ad-Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting to order. It's 5:35 p.m. We read this statement before we call the roll. Due to COVID-19, this will be a virtual Ad Hoc Charter Review Committee meeting only. The city has accepted public comments as part of the meeting, which comments can be mailed to public comments at cityofhomestead.com. Public comments will be made part of the record and included in the minutes. The comments could be submitted up to 24 hours prior to the meeting and will be made part of the minutes. Comments are limited to 300 words per comment, and name and address for the record should be included with those comments. So having said that, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Mayor Stephen Losner.
Present.
Mr. John Moss.
Present.
Mr. Stephen Booker.
He's on mute.
Mr. Stephen
Mr.
Booker.
Turn off your mute.
Present.
Mr. Les Burke. Mr. Timothy Craig. Mr. Craig.
He's muted as well.
Mr. Craig. Mr. Julio
Mr.
Guzman.
Craig, you're off mute now. You can chime in on as present.
Mr. Julio Guzman.
Present.
Mr. Elvis Maldonado.
Here.
Ms. Chandra Mallory. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum of, it's like 5 members, 5 of the 7. All right, we have before us the May 11th, 2020 committee meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? Would someone like to move approval of those minutes?
I'll move the minutes.
I second.
Okay, been properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Very good, thank you. All right, and before we move on, I just want to make a note that I understand from staff that a council member was concerned or under the impression that votes were changed last week. And I want to be really clear that that's not the case, that the minutes were amended to properly reflect how a vote was cast, that a member did not change the way that member voted on the 4-year term for mayor. So I want to be really clear about that, and if anyone had any misunderstanding on the committee, I apologize, but that's what we did. We corrected an error in the minutes of the second meeting back. All right, we have before us today a topic for discussion of a special election, the alternatives, timing and so forth, to fill a council vacancy in excess of 1 year. And the attorneys had provided us with some research as to some of how the other municipalities in Miami-Dade deal with those issues, and be happy to open the discussion. Anyone want to kick it off?
Anyone? I'll just say a few things, but Mayor, am I recognized?
Sure, please, go ahead, Councilman.
Thank you, Mayor. So looking at the notes that were sent to us, I think, we're trying to, and if I'm wrong in anything I'm saying, Mayor, please chime in right away and let me know. But we're trying to figure out now are we trying to figure out the time of when we start to, when does it initiate special election and to like a council appointment? Is that the goal here today?
The goal here today, as I understand it, and anyone's welcome to chime in that feels differently, including you, Mr. Pearl, our attorney, that we are discussing today the procedure for filling any council vacancy in excess, having a remaining term in excess of 1 year as of the effective date of the resignation. When those special elections would be called, what would be the time frame, et cetera.
All right. So we already agreed to the 1 year mark, correct? It was 6 months before, and then we agreed to 1 year. Is that correct? Or are we at 6 months?
No, the charter currently provides across the board appointment for, let me back up. You're correct. There is the discretion in the council, in the mayor, to not make an appointment, not make a nomination for a term of 6 months or less. So the discussion that we've been having the last several weeks has been for terms in excess of 1 year. So, by extrapolation, we're not touching, I don't think we haven't touched the discretion of the mayor and council to leave a vacancy of 6 months or less. And anywhere from 0 days to 365 may be filled by appointment. So we're talking today about the special election procedure for terms in excess of 1 year remaining through the next regular election cycle.
Okay.
So
just to kind of get us all on the same of what we should be discussing here, because I know that we go through the notes and there might be a recollection of where we were last time. I was going over through the notes and I noticed that for the most part, out of all the cities, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think we had 10, including ourselves, 10 cities that were information was submitted. And most of those where the council, it's normally for the majority of them, it's the council who fills the vacancy. For ourselves in Hialeah, and I think Sunny Isles was a mayor kind of nominated process, but was still with the council. So the only ones that are really like ourselves today in the sense of the mayor appointing and then the council approving is the city of Homestead, Sunny Isles Beach, and then the city of Hialeah. And all of those seem to go to a special election, whenever it's 6 months or more, is kind of the norm. Bay Harbor has 60 days, Doral 6 months, Hialeah, they had a hybrid. Hialeah Gardens was 180 days or more, Miami Springs 120, so they all seem to be more than, where it's more than 6 months or is where they're, going to do a special election. So I'm okay with, with the year, if it's more than a year, then it goes to a special election. Anything under a year, And in between the 6 months, then I guess, the mayor and council will approve. That's what I'm looking at right now. I seem to be okay with what I'm seeing there, with the 1 year more for the special election call. Other than that, I'm okay with that for now. So just wanted to go over some quick notes that I had made and then get everyone else's point. So I'll hold for now.
Very good, thank you. And I want to make note that it appears that Mr. Burke has joined the meeting. Did I hear Ms. Mallory? Did I hear her chime in? No, okay. Well, in that regard, Mr. Maldonado, I think our focus is timing of the election. Different municipalities have different time frames within which they're required to hold those special elections. And I just throw some of my thoughts out there, and maybe as a point of starting a discussion. And clearly, most of the municipalities whose provisions we've been given also make reference to other elections that, whether it be county, state, or federal elections, that you can piggyback that special election onto those elections if they're within a certain time frame. Otherwise, you have a standalone election. And here are my thoughts. That if in the event we have the need for a special election, and there's no other election being held more than 45 days or less than 90, then we have to have our standalone. And here's why I picked those time frames. Typically, our elections are 35 or so days, if there's a primary, from the date of qualification. So, that minimum 45 gives potential candidates time to file, to qualify, and get a campaign up and running. And one thing to bear in mind is in campaigns today, absentee ballots go out far in advance of the actual election day. So I think that, 45 would, for me, having been experienced on both sides of this issue, 45 would be a minimum time frame to have for that election to be held if it were piggybacked on another election. So again,
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
I'd like to address a question to Mrs. Sewell.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Craig.
How quickly or how much time does it take to arrange a special election? How quickly can it be done?
Well, you have to give the supervisor of elections at least 60 days notice prior to requesting that special election.
So we could arrange a special election within 2 months?
We could.
Now, Ms. Sewell, would that be for a standalone special or to be tacked on to a county or state election?
That's a standalone election, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we need a minimum of 60 for a standalone election. Okay.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I agree with you earlier that if somebody is going to be holding an office for a year or more, it should not be up to the remaining council members to decide. That should be up to the people to elect. And in this case, it seems to me the more quickly we can have the special election, the better it would be for everybody involved.
I agree. Thank you. Now, let me clarify something with Mrs. Sewell. Because maybe my thoughts are just not logistically doable. And again, under the context that there is another election already pending, that we piggyback on that, do we have as little as 45 days to put the supervisor on notice that we want to be part of that other election?
You have to give her at least 60 days notice, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, all right. So then my timeframes would be that, all right, so it would have to be 60 to 90 days, that we would piggyback on that. You would piggyback on the other election, that's already pending. But then if there's not an election that meets that criteria that we're not putting on, we would have to call for our own standalone election not less than 60 days into the future.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
All right, and along the lines of Mr. Craig's thinking, then I would propose that it be obviously not earlier than 60 nor more than 75. I don't know that you need a 90-day campaign period.
Again, Mrs. Sewell, would that give you sufficient time for the 75 days?
Well, you'd have to do the qualifying period, and you'd have to request the 60 days from the supervisor of elections.
Well, once we had that approval, how long would it take to set it up?
Well, she's asking for the 60 days so that she can have the ballots set to go.
Mr. Mayor, I think you see what I'm driving at. I'd like to get it done as quickly as humanly possible.
Well, so would I, and in my thinking, 60 days is too long, but what I'm hearing is that 60 days is a minimum, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, sir.
And that's imposed by the county, not by ourselves, correct?
Right, that's the county. That's what their requirement is.
Are we bound to follow that for our own special election?
We have to get permission from the supervisor of elections, so yes, we have to follow that.
I'm having a problem hearing Ms. Sewell.
Anybody else having a problem?
Yeah, she's very low.
Yeah, what happens with that system is that there's a loop back feed. So because of the speakers that are overhead and she has a mic in her loop hearing.
I'm speaking.
Mr. Mayor, maybe it would be beneficial for you to kind of walk us through like a scenario, a special election scenario stating that, you know, there's a seat open that has more than 1 year. For example, Elvis's situation we just went through.
Mm-hmm. Well, under the time frames that the clerk is sharing with us, then under that scenario, that the council would call for an election, well, no, let's back up. If there is another level of election already pending that is not less than 60 days in the future, nor more than 90 days in the future, our special election would be piggybacked upon a county election. State, federal, whatever. They all normally fall together. Okay? So then, if there is not a county election that falls in that window of time that we just discussed, the 60 to 90, let's say it's 6 months out, okay? For whatever reason, we don't fall in that window of another election day, then the city will call for its own special election to be held not less than 60 days nor more than 75 days from the date of the vacancy.
So can you use using the, for example, I resigned right after elections, so obviously there's the next election that's coming on now is that we have the what was the next, the only election that was coming up now is August 18th, right? Primary for this year. So from November to there, obviously it's more than 6 months. I guess at some point, then at that point, from the time that I would have left, the clock starts. So we're looking at 60, 90 days would be the election, correct? So that would have been like January, we're looking at the election.
Well, that's right. Like, for example, had your resignation come a little bit later in time, maybe we could have had a special election to fill your council seat on Super Tuesday. But the effective date of your resignation was more than 90 days prior to Super Tuesday.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm getting 60 days, no more than 75, and now I'm hearing 90.
Two different scenarios.
Okay.
If we are piggybacking on somebody else's election, in order to save some money, we'll give ourselves that 60 to 90 day cushion.
Okay.
If we have to hold our own, the clerk has given us her perspective that it may not be less than 60 days in the future. Okay?
Right.
But in the interest of what Mr. Craig and I discussed, the sooner the better. We're cutting our standalone election back from 90 to 75.
Got it.
Clear as mud?
So what about if, I mean, let's say let's say the 75 days is not too far from an election. Let's say it's 20 days from the election. Would you guys have the ability to say, look, you know, we know that we want to do it as soon as possible, but, you know, our windows, let's just use 60 to 90 days, just out of simplicity. From the 60 to 90 days, you know, we're not in a special election scenario. I mean, and to be able to piggyback off another election. So we would have our own. But what if that 90 day ends and there's still in about 20 more days, there is election? Is there something that you guys could do to be able to piggyback off of that? I'm okay with definitely, you know, 30 days. You know, if you're, you know, your 90 day ends and you still have 30 days or more, then obviously you do your standalone election. But if you're within a reasonable number, you know, 15, 20 days, you still piggyback off of that.
Well, and that's a good point of discussion for the committee, because in that scenario, we're talking about piggybacking and getting somewhat of a free ride on somebody else's election. So at this point, as a charter provision, that is somewhat in your discretion if you want to say 120 to build in that cushion.
Mr. Mayor, can I? Sorry.
And that kind of seems to be the norm, the 120 days. Like I said, it's 120 days is the normal number that we've seen. I think one was like 90 days, but the other was at 120. So I just, you know, just out of simplicity for me, I'm just trying to make this simple. Like, I agree as soon as possible, but, you know, it's always depending on how far is an election process. So the next special election or another election that's happening that we could piggyback. I'd like to, if we're within 120 days to be able to piggyback another election, I think it would be ideal that we would piggyback off an election. If not, if we're clearly past that, then by all means, let's definitely, you know, have our own election. That's just out of simplicity. That's my thoughts.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry. May I just for a quick moment? I'm listening to the conversation, and I think that there is a provision in your materials that sort of directly addresses the situation that you're discussing. If you want to take a look at Dural's provision, It's on page 16 of your agenda materials of the PDF. And what Doral does is they'll hold their own special election, not sooner or than 45 or more than 90 days, unless there is a city, county, state, or national election scheduled to take place within 150 days. So what they do is, in order to save money, they've made the calculation that an extra 60-day waiting period is worth it for them, in their eyes, to save the cost of the special election, that 60 days is worth the money. So and that seems to be where the discussion is going, I think the committee should just decide whether there is any time period within which it's worth it to wait a little longer to save the money of the special election or not. And if so, how many extra days? Is 30 extra days enough? Doral does 60, but I think that, you know, that provision on page 16 of the PDF, it's paragraph 2 under section 205 in Doral, really lays out what you guys are talking about well.
Well, Ms. Pearl, let me ask you this then. Are the charters that provide for 45 days, for less than 60 days, not executable in reality under the supervisor's rules?
It's a practicality. It's not a question of I think, legal or illegal. Most of these are charters that have been in place a long time. And I can tell you that, you know, in the past when there have been discussions about special elections, they have been, it's not always that easy to get a date. So I would defer to the clerk as to what practically they are requiring now. But I think that's also why you give yourself the outside window.
Well,
you
yeah,
can
but
do
I'm
it
thinking of
sooner,
the
great,
inside,
but
I'm thinking of the inside window too. I don't want to have our own standalone election by virtue of 15 days either. If our charter says 60 and we could get one in 45.
I don't see a harm in making it 45 on the low end. It's just practically, are you going to be able to do it? You know, can the supervisor facilitate that? As long as you're leaving yourself enough room, I wouldn't make 45 the outside window because that may leave you with no possibility.
Sure, but we could lower that window if, upon consultation with the supervisor, we can have a date that's less than 60, if necessary.
Yeah, I mean,
Mayor?
practically. Sorry.
I would like to ask Matthew something.
Go ahead.
Matt, under the Doral thing, it says not sooner than 45 days. What is their rationale for not sooner than?
Well, you need time for qualifying and generally a campaign period. So it's not like you're going to have an election 2 weeks after the vacancy. People are going to have to come in. You're going to give them a few days, probably a business week at least, to qualify for an election. And then there's going to be some campaign period, as well as I think that everybody understands that the supervisor cannot facilitate an election in 30 days. It's unrealistic.
Well, under the campaign theory, if there's a vacancy and we have 6 months before the supervisor allows us to do that, my guess is that people would be campaigning during that 6 months, during that 60 days.
Oh, I'm sure they would, but you're going from the date, assuming everyone's working from the date of the vacancy. And so unlike a normal election where people may have opened up their campaign accounts and been ready long before qualifying and would have started that, here, in theory, you don't know that this is an office that's available until the day it becomes vacant. And so I think there are some logistics that go along that candidates would have to deal with. And the truth is, if you wanted to make it sooner, use a 45-day opening. If the supervisor were willing to facilitate that, fine. Then 6 days, maybe that changes at some point. But I think that you have to be realistic about the lower time frame.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
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 My video just magically came back. I didn't push any buttons and my smiling face went away and now it's come back. Okay, so, but again, I guess this is an attorney and a clerk question. In the event there is an election, somebody else's election coming up within, let's say, between 45 and 60 days in the future, is the advice we're getting is that it's not possible to get on that ballot?
Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you needed a minimum 60 days to piggyback. That's what you've been told, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the piggyback could be solved by a window of 60 to 120 to build in a cushion on the far end. And if we have to have a standalone, we could go with a window of 60 to 75. 45 to 75. With the understanding that we might not get something between 45 and 60, but it gives us the ability to take something if it's available.
I think that's consistent with what other cities have. I want to manage expectations about what's practical given that we don't control the process.
Sure, but if we made it 60, it precludes us from 45. If we take 45, then we all understand we are subject to the schedule of the supervisor. So again, then it would be for a piggyback would be 45 to 120, and for a standalone would be 45 to 75.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Guzman. Councilman Guzman, yes.
In reference to the language that Doral has there, which is 45, and if there's one special election or a state election coming 150, what part of that language does anybody not agree with?
Well, I was pulling the 120 because that's the last conversation that Councilman Maldonado had. And that's kind of a splitting the baby on saving money to piggyback at the back end versus hurrying up. 150 days is a long time.
I see. Does anyone else have any major issues with 150 days? Or do we all, as a group, think it's too far out?
If I may speak briefly, I apologize. I was running late. Is it too late to get counted as present here so that I can vote on the matter?
No, I meant to indicate you had joined the meeting some time ago, so please go ahead.
No, I was just making sure that you all were aware I'm here.
Did you want to address this matter?
I'm a little in. I've taken my notes, and I am playing it by ear until I hear a little more of the conversation.
Well, okay, so I'm not certain where you came in, so let's go through it one more time so that we're all certain to be on the same page. If in the event there is a council vacancy in excess of 1 year, the discussion is to have that vacancy filled by special election. And if there is an election being conducted for a county, state, or federal office within 45 to 120 days of the effective date of the vacancy, then we will piggyback onto that election that was happening anyway. If there is no election happening otherwise, then we would have a standalone special election, not less than 45 nor more than 75 days in the future. And the rationale is that we've given us more time at the back end to piggyback onto the election that's already going on in order to save money versus having our own standalone by missing that window of opportunity.
If I may speak, Mayor, you indicated 60 to 120 days for piggyback, correct?
45. Now, the clerk has said likely we can't do it for less than 60, but we talked about giving ourselves that near end cushion if it was available.
Okay, because my note that as I came in, and again, I'm late, I apologize. I recorded 60 to 120 for piggyback and 45 to 75 for standalone.
So at some point, and again, based on what Attorney Pearl said, earlier on, the clerk talked about that the county would likely need not less than 60 days. But if we put 60 days in there and it can be done in 45, we're out of luck. So that's the reason for putting the lower end.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Greg.
I have strong reservations about the 120-day cushion. That's additional 4 months. We would have a 3-3 council in case of a tie, and I think that's too long.
Mayor?
Yes.
Okay, so let me see yes. So I'm okay. The numbers that I would looking at all the numbers, I mean, we're really splitting hairs as low as 30 days and no more, the maximum of 120 days, 35 days to be exact, in the sense of the low numbers. The 45 days, my suggestion would be I hear Mr. Craig in regards to as soon as possible. The only reason I say the 120 days is just to make sure that we give ourselves that we don't put a number too low that we're missing the window in order to piggyback off another election. That's it. So again, and a majority of these other cities have the 120-day window as their normal number. So we're going lower than the normal numbers, right? 45, and sticking with the majority of their numbers being 120 days. So 45 to 120 days would be the number that I would suggest that we would take on. And the 120 days is just just for that window of. How many days, let me ask you this, Mayor, how many days did it take for this whole process to be fulfilled for our situation, our current situation that we just passed, that we just went through? How many days was that?
Well,
from the
your total vacancy was 90 days, correct? Ms. Avila was appointed finally in February. So we had December, January, February, 90 days of a 6-member council, more or less.
Right. And then, and 90 days being the number that you really was asking for in the sense of this other, for the mayor appointee, right? You went from 60 days to 90 days.
Correct. And again, that was a function of the number of meetings we have and the timing of the vacancy.
Right, and which is fine. We're in other words, we went from the 60 to 90 to adjust for that time. So that's all I think that's all I'm saying here, is that the 120 days is extending or giving us that extra number just to make sure and give us the opportunity to piggyback off another election. Normally, I think the reason why they use the 120 is because normally there's that election within that time frame. 45 to 1 would be my suggestion.
And certainly for our own standalone election, I could never support the far end of 120. That's excessive. But to me, this is a balance of saving money.
Quick question, if I may.
Yes.
After there are 90 days that the mayor has, there are an additional 30 days until the 120-day mark, correct?
Well, we're mixing apples and oranges a little bit there.
Yeah.
That 90 days applies to a term of 1 year or less.
Okay,
Okay? That's a different scenario.
got it.
We're talking about
A year or more.
taking the appointment power out of the hands of council and putting it into the hands of the voters for a term with a remaining period of more than 1 year.
Okay, I thought I'm on the same page now.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor, may I
I'm sorry,
comment?
Mr. Moss.
Okay,
Mr. Moss.
go ahead. Ms. Moss?
Okay. I agree with Councilman Maldonado as far as the time frames. It tends to follow Doral very well. And, you know, if you read it, it says not sooner than the 45 days, which I agree with you, that if we have that in there and we can squeeze it in the 45 days, it's great. So it doesn't hurt to have it in there, not sooner than. But I also agree that the 150 days seems to stretch it out a bit much, even though I understand we'd be saving money by tagging along. I agree that the 120-day seems to be more of the outside that we would want to wait in order to tag on to another election in order to save the monies. So that's my thought.
Right, and as to a standalone, are you good with 45 to 75?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Guzman, Councilor Guzman.
If I think of the consensus of the entire city, if we were gonna save some money, the 120 days would be justified. I understand Mr. Craig's argument wanting it to be sooner than later, but I also feel the 45 to 120 appears to be what makes the most sense, in my opinion. And also the 60 to 75.
45 to 75.
45 to 75. Correct. Thank you.
Any other
Mr. Mayor?
discussion? Yes.
At one point, we had discussed earlier, and that I would agree with you again, that you said at one point, because of the need to fill the city council position, budgetary concerns should not be considered. I think I'm probably paraphrasing you, but I agree with that. There comes a time when the money is not the problem. It's not the issue. The issue is fulfilling the council seat.
Well, Mr. Craig, I agree with you in that, you know, from my philosophy that the appointment should be in the hands of the voters. Money is not an issue, but if we can save, and I'm pulling numbers out of the air, in excess of $50,000 by piggybacking and waiting 30 more days, for me, it's not the greatest scenario, but it's a good balance. I mean, typically, you know, on a good day, appointments take at least 60 days. Mr. Guzman, do you remember, when were you appointed?
February 19.
Okay.
February 2019.
All right. Mr. Porter resigned effective January. So yours was pretty quick. I think Mr. Nelson's dragged out and maybe Ms. Sweeney's did as well. You know, it's kind of all over the board in terms of you know, vacancy. And again, you know, in the old days, that 90-day vacancy that we just went through could have been six, seven, or 8 meetings. It was only 3. Different scenario. But look, I'm just moderating, so I'd love to hear from anyone else who has a thought on that before somebody makes a motion.
Well, in terms of my situation, it seemed to be very quick, and it was 60 days, and in Elvis's situation, seemed to have been rather long, and it was 90 days. So I do think what we've discussed here tonight kind of strikes a balance in both scenarios that we're talking about, whether it's less than a year or more than a year. I think we kind of hit a balance on both.
All right. Would somebody like to make a motion that a special that the language be crafted, that if there's a vacancy of in excess of 1 year, that in the event there is another election we can piggyback on between 45 and 120 days, that will be the process. Failing that, a standalone special election will be called in 45 to 70, not less than 45 nor more than 75 days from the effective date of the resignation.
Moved as so mentioned.
All right, moved by Councilman Maldonado.
Second.
By Mr. Moss. All right, now, I want to clarify one thing because there are some inconsistencies in different cities. I want everybody to understand that the effective date of the resignation, as it appears in our charter, is the day you depart. And let me make that a distinction here. Mr. Porter submitted a resignation letter many, many months prior to the effective date of his resignation, which was, I think, sometime in late December, early January of 1819. Same with, I think, with you, Councilman Maldonado. You submitted it prospectively. So it's the effective date for terms of our discussion would be the day you leave. So everyone understands.
Understood.
Stands that. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I am going to oppose the motion on the grounds I think the 120 days is too long. I want to make sure that is why I'm opposing it.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Madam Clerk, could you do a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Ms. Mallory?
Yay.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
You're muted, Les.
Yes.
Mr. Craig?
No.
Mr. Maldonado?
See.
Mr. Guzman?
Yes.
Mayor Lawson?
Nope, I don't vote.
Okay.
Not this time.
The motion carries.
Okay. Thank you all. Now, as we discussed last week, we were faced with the prospect of perhaps not doing the comprehensive review many of us have perhaps hoped to do due to the time constraints imposed upon us now. And I had asked the committee to submit some of the issues any issues that they felt they'd like to have discussed to go on the ballot. Mr. Craig submitted that he would like to have a discussion on converting to a true single-member district election. I had conversations with him, and I've had conversations in the past with the attorney, that is a very detailed and very laborious process, and is one that takes a lot of statistics and a lot of fitting together of moving parts. So in that regard, and I'll direct this to Mr. Pearl, you might have to come back to it and talk to us. I had indicated to Mr. Craig that I would be willing to extend the life of this committee beyond those issues, or to have meetings beyond the resolution of the issues that we're going to ask council to put on the November ballot, so that is one of the issues we can address going forward. Another issue would be Mr. Maldonado submitted that he wanted to have a discussion on transitioning to even year elections away from the odd year prospects that we have now, and that would be some pretty significant transitioning. For the most part, with a couple of issues, we got through the list that I wanted to get through. But there's one issue that's related to the issue we've just addressed, and we can begin thinking about it, if you will, and that is what happens if, well, understand, let me put it in real world scenario. If Steve Shelley had decided to resign his seat and run for mayor when he was holding the office of interim mayor, I believe that under our charter that we may have been in a situation where there was an appointment rather than an election. And I'd like us to have a conversation about providing that if an interim mayor resigns to run for mayor, that the interim mayor's council seat is then filled by that upcoming regular election. And the same scenario would be if a council member resigned midterm to run for mayor. Again, let me put this in a real world scenario. When I resigned midterm in 2007 to seek the mayor's office, that fell into the appointment arena rather than being filled by that 2007-11. And I guess I kind of like some feedback as to whether or not this committee wants to take a look at drafting language that clarifies that in either of those events, that those vacancies are filled in that upcoming election rather than by appointment after the election. Or by special election. It would be by special election based on our terms here that we just finished discussing. A council seat, we would have a regular, under our current situation, if the special election were passed and we didn't address this, we would have a normal election and then have to have a special election for that council seat that became empty by the ambitious council member that decided to run for mayor. So is that something that we want to also have the attorneys address at our next session? Galvez?
Yeah, I think so. I think that scenario has played through many of our minds, or the minds of people who have, they're in office now, they're holding the seat, they're thinking they want to run for the mayor's seat in the upcoming election because, let's say the mayor is terming out, and they would have, and they're still in office, they still have, let's say, 2 years, then they would have to resign to run for that seat that's coming up. So you're right, and I think that's kind of my concern with what's happening now in the county. Let's say Cava is running for mayor. District 8, she resigned. I think she resigned, but she will hold that seat till November. And I'm not sure, and I've looked at the language of that to figure out, when does that District 8 election happen? Is it appointed to the existing members, or is it a special election after the fact, or will it come up on the November election that's happening now? Obviously, I mean, and then in that scenario, how does it also work out? In her case, there's only 2 people, or I'm not sure if there's a primary or if there's more than 3. I don't know how many people are in that seat. I know 2 people run in that seat. I think there's a third. So I don't know how that plays out in that scenario, because in the August 18th election that's coming up now, I don't think there's a primary. I'm not sure. And then if there is a primary or the primary or not, then, what happens in November? So I think that because I couldn't find a definitive answer, then I would say I think we should have a definitive answer because I think we don't have one now.
Well, clearly the county charter is not our charter, but, I'm a firm believer in having as many answers as possible rather than ambiguity and political discretion.
Correct. So I would have the appetite to have that discussion for myself for that reason, because right now I'm seeing that scenario played out in Miami-Dade County. It's not defined, and it leaves a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of, I've talked to everyone who's in the know, and they don't know. So
right.
That speaks volumes.
And I'll tell you, I think in our scenario that we have, I think clearly there is a public appetite to fill vacancies by special election. And to overlook this issue, I think would kind of be a slap in the face that we did that, but okay, Councilman Y resigned to run for mayor, and now we're going to have another election. You know the scenarios. You've been there. A lot of us have lived it, in the middle of it and on the edge of it. So Mr. Pearl, I think, maybe we need to address that both for the interim mayor situation as well as a resigning council member to seek the office of mayor to take out that ambiguity.
I want to make sure that I understand what we want to do, because so the reason that, for instance, Mayor Porter's resignation that you spoke about earlier played out the way that it did, with the effective date coming, post-election, or would if Mr. Shelley were to resign to run because under state law, and the state's resign to run law, your resignation has to become effective upon the date when you would take office. So what I'm hearing is there may be an appetite to impose, in this scenario, our own resign to run provision within the charter that would require the person to resign sometime before qualifying, some defined time, and I'll have to speak with the clerk about the practicalities of that, but sometime before qualifying so that becomes effective, and that the vacancy in the council seat that would be created by them running is also filled, that those last 2 years of their term would also be filled at that same election to avoid the need for a subsequent special election just 60 to 90 days later.
Right, that's exactly what I'm thinking.
Right?
And I'm looking at the South Miami provisions on page 2 of the South Miami provisions.
Okay.
And it seems that they expand that resign to run window. As I understand it, resign to run says 10 days prior to the first day of qualifying, you have to resign or you have to leave right then. And it talks about putting the clerk on notice not less than 15 days prior to qualifying starting. That gives potential candidates plenty of time to get themselves together. It gives them the 15 days prior as well as the week of qualifying to get things done.
But when do we want the effective dates of the resignation to be?
Well, I think that you still ought to have the ability that you have under the state resign to run law, that if you file it timely, you can remain in office through
the
election day, or the day you would have taken that other office. Okay? That's fine. But I'd like to see some provision that puts the world on notice that this seat will be open and it will be filled by this same general election that the current holder is seeking other office in.
Okay, I understand. I think I'll have to talk with Liz and the supervisor of elections to see what kind of time frame they need with respect to getting that extra seat on the ballot. I don't know. I can't imagine it's that much more.
But if the resignation is submitted before qualification starts, why would that be an issue? Because we know that effective.
It's just an extra seat that wouldn't have been on the ballot.
All right.
I doubt it's a major issue because I can't imagine that adding an additional seat would be that big of a deal. Before we set the time frame, I want to make sure that they can live with whatever we set.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Yes.
Let's say, for example, interim Mayor Shelley decided to run for mayor. I understood the language in our charter that the council seat that I held, you'd also have to be elected at the next coming election. Meaning you don't just get grandfathered in, you'd have to go through a normal election like everyone else. Is there some ambiguity in the language currently?
Mr. Pruitt, you want to jump in?
There's an issue of timing, and it's exactly what the mayor is trying to address here, and I fully support. I think it's a good idea, which was technically he could have decided during qualifying, and it would have been impossible to get the election on the ballot. There wouldn't have been a window for somebody else to hop on that. So what we're trying to do is establish a time frame before that so that we can ensure that remaining term is filled on the same ballot. But if Vice Mayor Shelley would have decided on the last day of qualifying that he was going to go in and do that, practically it would have been impossible.
Okay. All right. So we're expanding on that to make it a bit more clear.
See, as the charter is written now, Councilman Guzman, there would have been no election for that Northwest seat. It would have been, as the charter is written now, by appointment, and as we propose to have it written for the first hour of our conversation, it would still be by special election. So we're talking about repairing that to ensure that it is up for election in that regular election.
Got it.
Okay. The other issue I had was, consider some ambiguity in the charter, and I want to ask, without expanding on it too much, I'd like to have the clerk circulate the minutes and the ballot question from 2002. There are two schools of thought. One is that you have to do 12 years of any combination and step away for 2 years to not violate term limits. The other school of thought is that a council member who does 12 full years then can run for mayor without violating term limits. I would like us to talk about that at length and make some recommendation to council one way or the other.
So I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, I had that as something that I wanted to say as well in regards to that, because there is ambiguity in regards to that. We're not sure. Now, so from what we understand right now is that once you finish your 12 years, that's it. You have to take a 2-year break. Now, I think one of the issues that I saw that I heard of was, if the person's in their last year and it's in the beginning of the year, you know, when is that, when does that 12-year take? Does it take the last day and then it takes 2 years? Or is it, what if let's say within 6 months of qualifying, you know, let's say I'm in my 12th, going in my, there's still 6 months left, and if I want to run for mayor, and I submitted my information, you know, answer. Am I correct by saying that, Mayor
Well,
Lawson?
that was one permutation of it, but the other
Right.
is whether or not, there was a prohibition against jumping from council at a full 12 to mayor.
Right.
Or violating, I guess the basic issue is, can you exceed the 12 consecutive years? And consecutive means a 2-year break in service by doing different offices. You know, Mr. Maldonado, you and I know inside baseball, so let's not prejudice the rest.
Yeah,
of the
I'm being 100%, like, these are issues that I've ran into or I've heard and I've thought about, or, you know, and there wasn't a clear answer. And I'll show you examples. Let's say, you know, again, let's say the scenario I played in my head, because there is no clear answer. If I was in my last year, let's say I was going into my last year, and there, you know, there's no answer. Like, there's a simple question. It's not over yet. My 12 years is not over. I'm starting my 12th year. Can I resign and run for mayor? Yes or no? I'd like a simple answer, yes or no. No, you know, then, you know, how do we define it so it's so that we don't have that question, so there's no doubt in our problem.
I agree. Just like, you know, like we talked about earlier, the clear parameters. You know, either one way or the other, let's clarify it. So in that regard, there are some minutes from 2002, as well as the ballot question and the motion and so forth, dealing with term limits. It was within the context of term limits. If we could circulate that for the next meeting and begin to address that. In that regard,
Mayor?
yes.
I'm sorry, if I can chime in real quick. I was on that 2002 Charter Review Committee, and I distinctly remember us discussing the fact that what we tried to do is that we wanted a limit of 12 years, whether you did 3 4-year terms as council member, or 6 2-year terms of mayor, or a combination of the same. But after 12 years, it was the intention, and maybe it's not clear, that somebody had to walk away for 2 years before they came back and either ran for mayor or council member. So, and that part I distinctly remember. That was the first time we ever put term limits in.
Correct. Mr. Moss, I'll say I agree with you, and there's a really neat quote in the minutes from you to that effect. So the 12 years at one time is enough, no matter what. But there is some ambiguity in the language that was finally adopted, and I would like us to bring that issue to the council. But since next Monday's a holiday, Mr. Pearl and Madam Clerk, subject to everyone else's availability, is Tuesday clear?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have the council meeting on Wednesday.
All right. Does anyone on the panel know right now they have a conflict next Tuesday after the holiday?
Talking about May 26th, correct?
If today's the 18th, yes.
Okay, I'm good.
All right, well, let's tentatively set it for 5:30 on May 26th, next Tuesday. And
I'm good for that.
We'll bite off another couple of big issues. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move it.
Move.
Second.
Second. Thank you all. Appreciate
Mr.
you
Mayor.
being here. Meeting adjourned.